Welcome back. I am John P. Today, I'm going to be answering your questions that you have asked me on my Instagram, The Real John P. Periodically, I will do these question and answer sessions because I receive a lot of questions both about my business, Del Rey Watch, delraywatch.com, where we buy, sell, and trade watches, but also about what I think is going on in the wild watch market of today, what watches I think might be important tomorrow, and also just kind of odds and ends of questions that people are just curious about. So if you do have questions, make sure to follow me on Instagram, The Real John P, where I do these from time to time. Before we jump into that, I want to share, of course, on the wrist today, Rolex Always Perpetual 39 Red Grape on the wrist. Once again, if you follow this channel, you know I seem to always grab this watch, even though I have others that I could easily wear. And of course, the video that I mentioned about kind of the day-to-day review of this is still in the works. And also, do not forget to check out sinclairstraps.com for the best premium watch straps. So, without further ado, let's jump into it, answering your questions from today. Now, the first question, and I have my laptop right here looking at the notes, but the first question I was asked is, if you had to wear an Ublo for a year, which would it be? Now, this is very difficult and tricky for me because the reality is Ublo makes generally their men's watches larger, and even the smaller case sizes tend to have kind of the lugs that are just too broad. So for my particular wrist size and shape, it just doesn't work very well. But a very obscure Ublo watch that I like a whole lot is kind of a red grape colored dial from some of the earlier MDM Ublo watches from the original days. And actually, particularly, this one is called the Ublo Professional. It's a dive watch, go figure, but it has that kind of red grape dial, smaller case size, and, you know, at this point, going into vintage. So probably that would be the Ublo that I would wear, not considering price point, things like that, but also there is a flyback chronograph from the same kind of era called the Super B, which I think is just cool and is a little less showy, I think I would probably say. And if you know me, that's something I definitely don't gravitate towards. Now, the next question I think is a very great question. This is going to be, why does JLC not get enough love? Well, I talk to collectors about this all the time, and while I don't agree with this next statement, some collectors just think that JLC, Jaeger-LeCoultre, is just kind of boring. Now, they have classic iconic watches, including the Reverso, and at this point, I would even consider some of their master watches, along with the Polaris, to be pretty classic, having a long-running history. But the reality is they don't take too many risks outside of risks that watchmaking has been taking for decades and decades, right? They'll do some skeleton watches, they'll do complications, they'll do things like that. But in terms of following in the suit of all the other watchmakers today, like Rolex and now Omega with these colorful dials and things like that, JLC really doesn't jump on that particular bandwagon. They're kind of considered the watchmaker's watch brand for the reason it's more about what they do and what they provide in terms of horology than kind of the latest fare and accessory-wise attention to detail with the colors and aesthetics. But what do you guys think about JLC? Leave that in the comments below. Once again, I actually really love the brand for that particular reason. Next, what are your thoughts on the new Omega watches? Are they copying Rolex? What do you think about this? I received a few questions, so I kind of connected them together in one statement. Here's the thing, if you haven't seen it, I think I might make a video about this because I did a video in the past predicting what Omega was going to come out with, and they came out with Rolex Always Perpetual competitor in a 38mm case size with colorful dials, not exact copy of Rolex, but their own interpretation of similar colors, the greens, the blues, the reds, the oranges. A little bit different, a little more subtle, and almost, I would say, somewhere in between in terms of colors between Rolex and Grand Seiko, which I think is cool, and it fits the brand in terms of being geared towards the collectors. They're somewhere in between Grand Seiko and Rolex, but of course, they also came out with a green Hulk or Kermit or Surmit, I guess you'd call it, Omega Seamaster 300M, the dive watch offering. And I think it makes sense. Do I think that they're copying Rolex? No, it's their own interpretation of what people want, right? It's one of those situations where you hear watch collectors complain, I can't believe Omega doesn't have a green dial Seamaster. And then they come out with one and people say, well, they're copying Rolex. So it's kind of a, one of those scenarios where it could go both ways, but the reality is people want these things, and I think that time will tell, and the proof will be in the sales whether or not people think it's a ripoff of Rolex or whether or not people actually love and enjoy them, which I think is actually going to be the case. Now, next, what do you think the future of two-tone sports watches is? I see the demand for two-tone sports watches actually increasing. I see that people don't want to pay a premium necessarily for stainless steel sometimes when they can have that extra value of having the gold. And sometimes people just want a bit of a flashier watch, especially if maybe they're not focused just on the collecting aspect of it. Maybe they just want a nice watch, and gold does mean certain things to certain people. So the reality is, I do see more of an interest in these two-tone watches. I think time will tell, but I do see more people gravitating towards them. If you watch this channel, you know I did try out the Rolex Explorer, the Rolex Explorer 1 in the two-tone, in the 36 millimeter case size. I actually had an issue with the watch, so I sent it back. But I really liked it, enjoyed it. I thought it was cool, and I can understand the appeal for some people and why it is increasing. Now, next question we have is, will the Glashütte Original CQ retain value? This watch has been very hot recently, and it's made so many lists of top Rolex Submariner alternatives, and I think for good reasons, because they focus a lot on the movements, the finishing of the movement, comparatively to Rolex. You can't see the movement in the Submariner, let's keep that in mind, but they have focused on things like that in the watch. And I think it is a little bit more focused on the collectors and diehard watch enthusiasts. And so that's an interesting aspect. And as we see more collectors gravitate into these types of watches, there's a good chance that they will retain value better than something comparable would in the past. Now, I'm not saying that they'll go up in value or it'll be something like in terms of Rolex Submariner, because they are really niche brands, right? It's not universal. It's not universally recognized outside of the watch world for the most part. But I do see it, if you like it, being not a dangerous play and certainly not a dangerous watch to put in your collection. Out of all the watches from that particular brand, I think this is probably the safest model. Now, next we have a question, and this question is, Grand Seiko quartz watches, are they worth it? It's up to you to really decide. The 9F is a truly fantastic quartz movement. One of the best, if not pretty close to the best. Citizen actually has some quartz-driven options out there that are technically spec for spec a little bit better, but we're really splitting hairs at a certain level. So the 9F and the Grand Seiko quartz offerings are really great. So if you like that and you maybe want a watch that's truly rugged and durable without the kind of the shortcomings of the automatic or the mechanical movements, a battery-powered watch is, with the exception of it being, electronic at a certain point with the chips involved, it's just a good, rugged, durable watch. So I think it does serve a purpose, but in terms of it being worth it, it's really up for you to decide if you like that type of a thing. Now, next, we have Cartier, and Cartier, are they taking over the Omega watch market? Now, I see a big push for the Cartier watches, especially with the Mustang Cartier and some of the more contemporary offerings like the Skeleton Santos and some of the other watches like that. Now, do I think that they're going to beat Omega? I just don't actually see them competing in the same categories, right? Cartier is a little bit more classic, and they don't anymore deviate too far away from what they do offer and what they specialize in, which is dressier watches, sometimes getting into that more casual area, but they don't focus too much on that sport watch category, and that's really where Omega shines and I think does the bulk of their business. So, if Cartier is doing more business than Omega, I think it's just a show of the times of where people are buying luxury items and not necessarily looking at watches from an enthusiast perspective. When you consider all the buyers of watches in the world, what is the percentage of enthusiasts compared to people that want a nice watch from a reputable brand? And so I think that's probably more of where that trend is coming from, but I don't see them really competing with each other at the same in the same categories rather. Next, what are your non-vintage grail watches? I have to be honest with you. The reality is that with Del Rey Watch, since, starting Del Rey Watch and having access to, watches that when I was growing up, it would be so difficult to actually, find these watches in stores, or let alone, being able to handle them at any time and, buy these watches, sell these watches, trade these watches. I just get my fix in that way. So while I do collect watches, I typically just find myself putting vintage watches in my collection. And I don't know if it's because we do less vintage at Del Rey Watch, but it's just something that I gravitate towards myself as a collector at this point. So in terms of modern grail watches, it's difficult because I do kind of scratch my itch through Del Rey Watch. So I think I probably would truly have to think about that and get back to you on that one. I know it's a very unsettling answer, but it's just kind of the reality of this situation. Next, we have, how can Panerai be more in the game? If you watch this channel, I talk about Panerai all the time because I'm just so interested at how they place themselves in the market, right? It's like Panerai was that tool, kind of a guy's watch, and now there's so many brands out there, including Tudor, which really have, managed to captivate a lot of these people that I would have considered Paneristi or Panerai collectors when there was so much or so less offerings from these brands. And now you have all these brands offering a lot of overlapping watches, and you just see Panerai not doing as well as they used to with their diehard collectors, right? Paneristi was like a movement almost in the watch collecting sphere, and now I don't see too many Paneristi out there. I mean, are any of you guys still considering yourself the Paneristi? I'd love to see it and hear it in the comments below. I mean, the watches sell, pre-owned at great discounts through us, like Del Rey Watch, but in terms of who's walking into the boutique buying the watches, I'm not sure. Once again, I'd love for your opinions on that in the comments below, but from our perspective, my perspective, Del Rey Watch, we don't see too many Paneristi out there, and how they can collect more momentum and kind of get back to where they were in terms of popularity. I really don't know what they can do, if anything, to get to that kind of a place they were at with just so many more competitors out there in the industry. But feel free, chime in the comments below. Now, next, how will Cartier continue their momentum? The reality is Cartier is a powerhouse brand. They offer so many high-end jewelry pieces and luxury goods items, and it's just universally known that Cartier produces a good product on pretty much everything they do, right? I mean, there's been some kind of odds and ends exceptions of where enthusiasts have found, plastic movement rings and things like that. Hey, these things happen, right? People and companies do cut costs and cut corners sometimes, and these are decisions they make. But the reality is, solid brand, old brand, doing generally really great things. So I don't know that they necessarily have to do anything besides don't do anything too bad, because they really can at this point, I think, lean on their name of Cartier and probably let the open market take it from there. So just as long as they don't do anything bad, I think Cartier is still going to be doing just fine. Next question, how do you check the provenance without papers on the watch? Well, unless we're talking about like a special or a unique watch, the reality is the provenance doesn't matter generally all that much. Now, people have differing opinions on this, and that's why some people just prefer to buy a watch with the papers. But if you have a good service center, you have great watchmakers, you have people on your team that really know what they're doing and how to handle the watches and do various things like serial number checks and also keeping the watches under different holding requirements depending on the states that you live in. These things all contribute to kind of the safety and the peace of mind that the watch that you're buying from wherever you're buying it is a good decision. But in terms of the provenance, unless that watch is something unique or special, like the Carfax kind of equivalent in watches, there's been some companies that have tried that type of startup, but the reality is, it's at the end of the day, it's a watch. These things are traded, they go in and out, and anything in the watches can be fixed and repaired by really great watchmakers. And so in terms of wear and tear, I mean, these things are designed to last hundreds of years at this point. So I don't think there's really anything to be worried about in terms of buying watches out there pre-owned. But if there just are some collectors that like to have papers, they think it's nice, it adds to the value, and sometimes it does. Most of the time it can just be a nice thing to have as a collector. So that's up for people to decide. Personally, I don't care if my watches necessarily that I buy have papers, but some people do. So that's up for you to really decide and make a decision on. Now, next question is, I have a 3-watch collection valuing about $7,000 US. Should I sell all of them and get just one watch? That's difficult for me to decide for you. I'd have to know what your collection looks like, your lifestyle, right? If you have a bunch of different activities that you do that you need a watch for, that might be something that you need, right? Maybe a dress watch, maybe a sport watch, something for the office, something for home, something a little more showy that you happen to like, and something that maybe is going to give off a different impression. So that's probably for you to decide. But I think if you're more in that kind of athleisure type of lifestyle, more casual lifestyle, which I think things kind of seem to be heading, at least in the United States, probably could consolidate, get into one watch that you really love, but that's up for you to really decide. And honestly, more information would just have to be had on that. Now, next question, what is the best casual dive watch for between $1,000 and $1.5 thousand US? Now, this is going to be a little bit difficult because watches are really taking a turn for either the best or the worst, depending how you look at it. But nonetheless, watches are really increasing in value. So in terms of a $1,000 to $1.5 thousand dive watch, I think if we're looking at retail prices, the Doxa Sub 200 is a really great watch on a rubber strap. I wore it for a little while. I really liked it, enjoyed it, and thought it was a great deal, a great buy. And it was a quality watch. It was able to, withstand different elements, right? It was a tough, rugged, durable watch. You could dive with it. Obviously, it's a dive watch. You could use it for sporting. And I think the prices that they're offering from Doxa are really fair. But in terms of anything much better for that at this price point, unfortunately, sports watches are so popular where the prices are just going up, and this range has become pretty difficult. I think, if you can go on eBay, go on the forums, and find yourself maybe a transitional period, a late 90s, early 2000s Omega Seamaster, like Bond era Seamaster at this price point, maybe have to get it for $1,500, $1,800 out of Japan. Might still be able to do that, especially if you get the 36 or the smaller case sizes offerings, not the 41. I think you can do that. If you can do that, great. But things have gotten a little bit out of control in terms of pricing in this segment for these types of watches. So Doxa Sub 200, I think, is a great option. Next question. What is your opinion on Instagram raffles? These things pop up all the time. I've seen them on all the Facebook groups. I've seen them on forums. I've seen them on Instagram, on YouTube. People do these raffles. And the thing with these raffles is there are different raffle and sweepstake laws depending on where you are in the world. So I think that type of thing can be kind of hard to police. And so when these things happen or people ask me the opinion on these raffles, I always try to, first of all, I tend to avoid them for the most part, right? Because you start getting into lottery laws, right? In the United States, there's different states have laws in terms of how lotteries can be handled because the reality is the state runs lotteries for the most part. And so it becomes more, really becomes more legislated, and there's specific rules and laws when it comes to that. So I would really caution anyone against these things. Now, if it seems legitimate and there are proper disclaimers, do that at your own will. But I personally avoid these raffles just because there's something about it that typically just doesn't seem right to me. But of course, make up your own minds and feel free to do as you wish. Now, next question. Does playing gold with automatic watches hurt the movement? Okay, I think they mean golf. So does playing golf with automatic watches hurt the movement? Now, I've heard of stories where people say, hey, I was playing golf and the rotor fell off, or I was playing golf or doing something similar and, my Audemars Piguet Royal Oak decided to stop working, things like that. And the reality is you just are exposing the watch to more force than it would be exposed to if you were just wearing it on your wrist. So you're increasing the likelihood. Now, I don't know what the factor is of increasing the likelihood of the chances of something going wrong, but for the most part, modern sports watches are made to be worn during sports, right? I mean, you have, $1 million Richard Mille watches being used in tennis matches, but they also do break from some time to time. So it's really up to your own risk. I don't think the risk is really great, but you are adding extra force to the watch. And so personally, when I play golf, I really don't want to have a watch even on my wrist just because it's adding additional weight to the wrist. It becomes kind of encumbering to a certain degree because it does restrict kind of the motion. And it's almost a distraction for me. So I just don't do it when I play golf, but some people like to, and occasionally you do hear of something happening to the watch while they were playing golf. So for the most part, you're okay. But even when talking about these things like exposing the watches to water, I always err on the side of caution because if you're not gaining anything from doing it, why really do it? And last question, what do you think about the Tudor 1926? This is a model that I've mentioned in the past that I really like, and I think that they're a pretty great value for what you get. I think they're attractive watches. I think the white dial with the blue accents and numerals is just cool. I think it's a nice looking watch. I think if you get one pre-owned, it's a great deal. Now, are these watches going to go up in value? I don't think so. There's not a huge demand for them. People tend to like Tudor for their sports watches, but if you're looking for a great, reputable, kind of casual, everyday, slightly on the dressier side watch, it's not a bad choice if you get a really great deal on it. And that actually is going to be all the questions that I was asked. Guys, what do you think about these things? Are there any other questions that you have? Please keep them in mind and make sure to check out my Instagram, The Real John P, where in the future you can ask me these questions. Once again, please do not forget to check out delraywatch.com. I really do appreciate it, and we'll see you next time. You've been chatting with John P.